Medical marijuana law in 1996, 18 states and the District of Columbia now permit the drug for medicinal use. And Colorado and Washington may be just the beginning. Rhode Island and Maine are the next states looking to legalize recreational use of the drug. The movement reflects an increasing acceptance of marijuana. Half of all Americans now support legalizing it, up from just 31% in 2001. But what are the implications regarding legalization, both at home and south of the border? And are the new laws in Washington and Colorado a game changer in Mexican-American relations? For the current issue of New York Magazine, Benjamin Wallace Wells pens the cover story titled "The End of Prohibition." In it, he writes that U.S. drug policy has shifted dramatically since Nixon first declared a war on drugs in '71. Quote, "Without really acknowledging it, we are beginning to experiment with a negotiated surrender." Benjamin, there are many people I know, not naming names, who would like to see the white flag waved on the war on drugs. I will point you to a Washington Post editorial yesterday that talks about decriminalization, but warns it is not yet clear how a quasi-legal pot industry might operate in Colorado and Washington, or what its public health effects will be. It could be that these states are harbingers of a slow national reassessment of marijuana policy, or their experiment could serve as a warning for the other 48 states. Probably a very middle-of-the-line road. You seem to argue that, well, based on the title of the story, that this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about marijuana and also about harder drugs, but with regard to pot, I mean, if you look at what happened in Washington State, which is where the dam broke and where the first state legalized recreational use of marijuana, where now, you know, presuming everything holds, they're going to be treating marijuana like they treat alcohol. Will be a licensed and regulated market. People who are in favor of legalization, the groups that supported legalization, put in $6 million. The people who are opposed to legalization put in a grand total of $16,000.
Wow.
So there was nobody who was there. I don't think there is anybody in American life anymore who's willing to stand up and put a bet on holding this line against marijuana legalization.
Well, especially when you sort of look at the fact that both sides of the aisle see a reason to legalize it. There's the economic argument, which is that it raises millions of dollars in taxes, and then there's the theoretical argument about, you know, the libertarian argument that, you know, the government shouldn't even be regulating this in the first place. Then there's also the efficacy of the war on drugs. And in your story, you write, "The war on drugs has always depended on a morbid equilibrium in which the cost of our efforts to keep narcotics from users is balanced against the consequences in illness and death of more widely spread use. But thanks in part to enforcement, addiction has receded in America, meaning, ironically, that the benefits of continuing prohibition have diminished."
Yeah, one of the things that's fascinating to me about what's happened in the last 5 years is you've had the case that the war on drugs has failed. 5 years ago, you heard from left-wingers and libertarians. Now you hear Chris Christie say it. You know, you hear former Reagan Secretary of State George Shultz, who played a big part in launching the international war on drugs, saying it. And what's happened in the last 5 years is that in two ways that equilibrium has shifted. One is that the use of cocaine in this country has declined pretty dramatically.
Right, and it's literally because cocaine users are almost dying off.
Dying off. You know, the age of the average chronic cocaine user has gone from 27 to 41. I mean, we're just seeing a rapid aging out of that population. So the costs of illness from drug use have declined. At the same time, following the militarization of the drug war in Mexico, we've seen almost 60,000 people die to try to hold that line of prohibition. So the costs of enforcing the line of prohibition have gone up. And so in both those ways, you know, these politicians who are now saying the war on drugs has failed are either intuitively sensing that or looking at those numbers and saying, you know, on the ground, something real has changed.
Well, and you have the fact that you have both Chris Christie and the president agreeing, saying literally, I think we have, let's listen to our Chris Christie sound in case people don't believe us.
The war on drugs, while well-intentioned, has been a failure.
President Obama back in 2004 while running for the U.S. Senate. Let's take a listen to what he said.
In terms of legalization of drugs, I think that the battle, the war on drugs has been an utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws. But I'm not somebody who believes in legalization of marijuana.
The question is, Richard, how much the president's stance has changed. We know that, I mean, it's not as if the Department of Justice is out there with SWAT teams as they were back in the day trying to shut down grow farms in, say, Humboldt County. And to what degree Holder is even going to pursue pot farms, given the states having different sort of positions on its legality.
Right, and it's striking that the tape of the president is that old. Right? And that
It is black and white grainy tape.
Has he made that anything similar, or in fact, many public pronouncements on drug policy? As far as I can tell, the drug policy unit in the White House is really engaged in a lot of public education primarily as well, and I don't think that, frankly, is going to end under any administration, whatever the state of the marijuana laws across the country. The question is, who is going to grasp this easy one, right? The next presidential round, someone is going to pretend that this is a bold position to at least question, not propose or advocate for decriminalization or legalization, but to say that drug policy has failed and that there needs to be something else. And maybe Chris Christie is that candidate.
But I think this is a case, though, where the public is far ahead of leaders, if you look at these votes in these states, because, you had Obama saying that 8 years ago, then really doing nothing about it. And you've had, in the policy think tank world, people who get out of office, like George Shultz is a great example. Once they're out of office and have no authority, they say, of course it's a failure. Everybody knows that. And it's only, the people on the ground who are taking these votes who are sort of leading the way, maybe creating some space for those folks, in power to actually start reassessing policies.
Well, the other aspect of this, and I'm sort of teeing up our next segment, but President Obama is meeting with the president-elect of Mexico today, and they're going to talk about a number of issues, but certainly the war on drugs is something that greatly affects border relations. In your piece, you say that the Mexicans effectively say, well, why stop at legalizing pot?
Yeah.
Legalize all of it.
And just this morning, Peña Nieto, the president-elect of Mexico, said in advance of this meeting with Obama that he thought we needed to have a broad rethinking of Mexico's participation in the war on drugs, and to think about alternative first principles. I think that Richard's right that there will be a kind of a long-term political question here, but there's also a very real and very present diplomatic question, which is that we have a whole bunch of countries south of the border that are sick of putting in their own lives, their own people's lives, to keep a product expensive for American users to get. And so I don't think that legalization of hard drugs or the transit of drugs is really on the table, but I think that there could be some rebalancing that we could see in what we expect Mexico to do, what we expect Guatemala to do, and what we provide them.
It is a really great piece to read on a day like today before a bilateral meeting like this. It's also a great piece to read, generally speaking, as we talk about shifting cultural attitudes and political attitudes and economic attitudes towards drugs. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Drugs will certainly be on the agenda when President Obama meets with Mexico's president-elect this afternoon, but Mexico's